controlling of governments, controlling of populations, the blood traumas, this occultism, the raping of children, the harvesting of children. All this has been going on for so long. It was so hard to come running out of a hell that nobody believed existed.
Cathy O'Brien is not unique. I wish she were, because if she were, it would mean that this problem went no further.
In 1957, I was born into a multi-generational incest-based family.
At that time, there's a criminal faction of our government that was interested in targeting children such as myself for mind control.
My victimization rose proportionately until I was used on a White House Pentagon level during the Reagan-Bush administration.
I was used as a sex slave and also delivered messages to and from these government leaders.
While I was still really young and all that was happening, I do remember losing my free thought.
I couldn't even think anymore to hope that there was some place where people were kind.
Secret mind control programs began in America in September of 1946 when President Harry Truman quietly authorized Project Paperclip, a U.S. government program that allowed the Department of Defense to recruit and hire high-ranking Nazi German doctors, scientists, and spies into the United States. Over 1,600 Nazis and Italian fascists and their dependents were ushered in through South America with passports and assistance provided by the Vatican and the Red Cross. The purpose of this clandestine immigration was to infiltrate American governing jurisdictions, fortify secret societies, and establish new agencies with the ongoing agenda of the New World Order. Among the imports was Werner von Braun. Von Braun led the Army's rocket development team at Redstone Arsenal, resulting in the Redstone rocket, the first rocket developed to carry a nuclear warhead. Over the next 20 years, von Braun would go on to develop missiles, plan a manned spaceflight to Mars, and design a space station that would orbit the Earth. When NASA was established in 1958, Nazi Party member von Braun became the first director of the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Another prominent Nazi recruit for the U.S. was German General Reinhard Gehlen. Upon his arrival in Washington, D.C. in 1945, Gehlen met extensively with President Truman, General William Donovan, Director of Office of Strategic Services, and Allen Dulles. The objective was to reorganize American intelligence operations and transform it into the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, in 1947, which Dulles would become the director of. Reinhard Gehlen was also instrumental in creating the National Security Council, from which the National Security Act of 1947 was derived. This particular piece of legislation was implemented to protect and conceal an unconscionable number of illegal government activities, including secret mind control programs. As the U.S. government became saturated with the infiltration of Nazi intelligence, one of the more sadistic Nazi doctors, Dr. Joseph Mengele, was invited to extend his barbaric human research that he was permitted to practice in Nazi Germany. His experiments resumed in the United States in 1951 under Project Bluebird, which morphed into Project Artichoke and MK Naomi. These were the origins of what would become Project MK Ultra in 1953. The aim of these projects was outlined in a memo dated January 1952 that asks, "Can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against such fundamental laws of nature, such as self-preservation?" The data harvested from these experiments generated more experiments with the ultimate goal of controlling the entire planet by creating the New World Order. Program after program went on secretly, unbeknownst to the American public, utilizing hundreds of thousands of silent victims, most of them children.
New details are coming out in a trove of declassified documents that the agency has kept secret for years.
Thousands of government-sponsored experiments did take place at hospitals, universities, and military bases around our nation. In too many cases, informed consent was withheld. Americans were kept in the dark about the effects of what was being done to them. The deception extended beyond the test subjects themselves to encompass their families and the American people as a whole. For these experiments were kept secret, and they were shrouded not for a compelling reason of national security, but for the simple fear of embarrassment. And that was wrong. Under our watch, we will no longer hide the truth from our citizens. We will act as if all that we do will see the light of day.
Under the protection of the National Security Act, the CIA would continue cloaking these programs while funding them with secret arms deals, drug operations, and human trafficking. Projects such as Operation Spellbinder, which was designed to create sleeper assassins and Manchurian candidates who would be activated when hearing a key word or a phrase. Operation Often, which attempted to harness the power of occult forces, ran concurrently to hide the reality of another insidious program. Project Monarch.
My name is Cathy O'Brien, and I'm a survivor of MK-Ultra mind control, specifically the CIA's Project Monarch aspect, which is a multi-generational study that they were doing and use of multi-generational incest-based children. After 3 generations, behavior becomes autogenic, and that was part of the Hitler-Himmler research that was brought over in Project Paperclip by the Nazi and fascist scientists who are combining that information with the CIA back when I was born. My family had been sexually abused. My father was sexually abused. My mother was sexually abused. They'd both been ritually abused. Their parents had been, and of course I was being sexually abused. My father had been sexually abusing me as far back as I can remember. He bragged about sexually abusing me in infancy. And even though I couldn't determine that what he was doing was wrong, my brain still responded to his sexual abuse on its own. Our brains autogenically respond to trauma the same way. And my brain was trying to protect me from the sexual abuse that I was enduring. And it was so suffocating to me as an infant that it caused what is known as dissociative identity disorder, or formerly known as multiple personality disorder.
This is now professionally defined, this disorder is, as the mind's sane defense to trauma too horrible to comprehend.
I developed a compartment in my brain, a little area behind amnesic barriers that was actually the neuron pathway shutting down in my brain in order to compartmentalize the memory of the abuse, so that the rest of my mind could function normally as though nothing had happened.
They knew that that kind of compartmentalized brain response would be an ideal place to hide government secrets back then, because I couldn't think to bring those to mind. And this is why they started grooming me from such an early age. My father's sexual abuse expanded into child pornography, and he was sending this child pornography of me through the U.S. mails. And he was caught. The pornography was confiscated by a criminal faction of our government. The local politician approached my father and told him that he would receive immunity from prosecution if he would sell me into the CIA's MK-Ultra Project Monarch.
Project Monarch utilized a combination of psychology, cognitive neuroscience, trauma, and occult rituals to create within the victims one or more altered personas that could be then triggered and programmed by the handlers.
They subjected me to an occult blood ritual that was referred to as the right to remain silent. This blood ritual was so horrible that my mind readily accepted the mind manipulation that I endured afterwards, a hypnotic language, the neuro-linguistic programming that actually changed the way that my brain was functioning. They changed that so that they decided when, where, and how that particular compartment of my brain would be opened and accessed. And they replaced the triggering mechanism with hypnotic codes, keys, and triggers, hand signals. There's also phone tones that can also open those neuron pathways and give access to the compartmentalized memory as well.
As my brain was still forming, when abuse occurs prior to age 5 especially, there's so many other aspects of what our brain automatically does with the trauma. And as more and more compartments developed in my brain, those neuron pathways actually shutting down, there's no capacity for continuity of thought. And without continuity of thought, there's no concept of time. So I had no idea that my body began to not realize that I was supposed to be exhausted. I wouldn't know that I had just done all this over here, so it felt fresh over here. And so there's this physical endurance that's extremely heightened as a result of the strategic, structured kind of abuse that I was enduring at that point for creating these various compartments. As a really young child, while my brain was still forming, so much of the compartmentalization happened through experience in different people in different ways. Some of it would involve brutality, some of it involved suffocation. It happened on a subconscious level. The subconscious has no ability to question, reason, or consciously comprehend. And as more and more of those compartments develop, more and more conscious awareness is lost. My father had a 6th grade education, had earned his living as a worm digger. We were very, very dirt poor. But when he sold me into the project, he eventually went on to become a multimillionaire with government contracts. So already we're seeing how this was a structured system within a corrupt faction of our government that not only was targeting children like myself, but sanctioning the abuse through the court system, granting my father immunity from prosecution. As soon as my father sold me into the project, he was flown to Boston, Massachusetts, where the Catholic faction, the Jesuit faction of Project Monarch, was being run by cardinal law. My father was trained by cardinal law on how to raise me in the project. This included human trafficking. It wasn't called human trafficking back then. It was just being prostituted out to all the local politicians, the policemen, all the pedophile priests that were involved in my area, and those who were part of my grandfather's Blue Masonic Lodge. The Blue Masonic Lodge is where all the politicians came together and were actively part of making the plans for MKUltra mind control. They wanted me exposed to more trauma, especially occult trauma. It was through the slaughter of animals in any kind of occult ritual. And I experienced some horrific occult abuses through who would become my first handler in MKUltra, Wayne Cox. He was an occult serial killer. Wayne Cox was actually working as an assassin for CIA drug operations, for mercenary operations that were going on. I was exposed to the governor of Michigan, George Romney, and I was taken to Mackinac Island, Michigan, to meet with him, to be prostituted to various government leaders, including Canadian Prime Minister at the time, Pierre Trudeau. I was also exposed to who would become my owner in MKUltra, U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. Byrd was up there discussing various ways that they could expand mind control into the population. And he and George Romney discussed the ways that they could put it into the education system.
We must emphasize adult education, work toward a metropolitan school system where every youngster in the metropolitan area will have equal educational opportunity and equal financial support for his schooling.
Senator Byrd, as head of appropriations, has set it up where the states became dependent upon the federal government for funding for the education system. They had a plan for manipulating the minds of the children through altering their knowledge base.
Through this comprehensive understanding of mind control, scientists recognize the importance of affecting cognitive development at a young age. This set into motion the infiltration of our educational systems, controlling not only what to think, but how to think. From programs like America 2000 to No Child Left Behind to Common Core.
We will end what has become a race to the bottom in our schools and instead spur a race to the top.
The process of thinking critically has been eliminated. Standardized bubble testing has replaced analysis. Memorization has replaced inquiry and the process of learning.
Information control is a form of mind control, which is why they were so interested in taking over the education system and why they were interested in taking over the media. The CIA was very much involved in taking over the media with the Operation Mockingbird.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks? This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
I think it was entirely in order for our correspondents at that time to make use of CIA agent chiefs of station and other members of the executive staff of CIA as sources of information which were useful in their assessments of world conditions.
Would you say that continues today?
Well, I would think probably for a reporter it would continue today, but because of all of the revelations of the period of the 1970s, it seems to me that a reporter's got to be much more circumspect in doing it now, or he runs the risk of at least being looked at with considerable disfavor by the public. I think you've got to be much more careful about it.
Conditioning the minds of individuals through repeated disinformation was the intention behind CIA's Operation Mockingbird.
The suppression of information through the media had limited people from seeing that mind control exists so strongly in our world.
Exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
It stopped them from understanding that human trafficking was the funding mechanism of the New World Order. It stopped them from seeing the CIA cocaine operations that were being used. The so-called drug wars is nothing more than the CIA taking over the industry worldwide. Gary Webb was trying to report on it, and he was killed. So many on the front lines were being killed.
Only a few major corporations control an estimated 90% of all the news stations, television, movies, music, video games, social media, and the internet.
Social media and other internet platforms make their money by keeping users engaged, and so they've hired the greatest engineering and tech minds to get users to stay longer inside of their apps and on their websites.
Mass media has conditioned individuals using methods such as neuro-linguistic programming, occult symbolism, and harmonics.
They were enhancing the harmonics in the music to actually affect the neuron pathways in the brain in directions that they wanted, and then using specific lyrics to drive in a message. We need to be so mindful of the lyrics that are being carried on those harmonics into our mind and become aware of how much that kind of thing does affect us.
All the good girls go to hell.
Harmonics were added to their music to make them even more popular. These little children who had been horribly abused were programmed and harmonically tuned, and then the messages were programmed in, which would deliberately affect the social engineering of a generation or however many people they could affect.
Through continued secret human experimentation, scientists learned that repeated traumas coerce the function of the amygdala and the hippocampus to repress the dissociated memory. In order to continue functioning, the memory of the traumatic experience is sectioned off and encased by amnesic walls, creating an altar hidden from the main identity in the subconscious. While the barrier is down, handlers and programmers installed everything from secret messages to deliver, instructions for illegal activities, or programs for sexual perversions. The various levels of programs were named after the different brain waves to denote function. The amnesic barrier is then rebuilt to hide the identity of the abuser and memory of the programming, using trauma conducted through repetitive brutality, electric shock, and weaponized sound waves, known as harmonics. Due to the electrical nature of the brain, high-voltage electric shock devices such as cattle prods are commonly used and are extremely effective in cementing dissociation after torture. By developing the experiments, it was discovered that the effects that harmonics have on the RNA covering of neuropathways is highly effective in creating undetected mind control. Through trial and error, at the expense of unknowing human subjects, success was finally achieved. The experiments proved that certain inaudible sound waves will electronically encode messages into victims, making direct physical abuse no longer necessary for mind control programming. Since the inception of these experiments, what was learned has been implemented through the use of sophisticated equipment. The advancements made have offered the ability to track states of consciousness and alter it electronically and remotely, allowing for silent mind control to take place on a mass scale and go completely undetected.
I know that there are harmonic tuning places involved in NASA and at DARPA. The different places that were involved in MK Ultra, one was Disney, and I was taken to Disney World in Florida. They have very sophisticated setup in the underground or the underworld of Disney World where mind control programming occurs.
Walt Disney's stories were intentionally crafted using his thorough understanding of occultism as he climbed the ranks of Masonry and made connections which laid the foundations of the Disney Empire. Through relations to CIA operatives Paul Helliwell and Wild Bill Donovan, Disney was able to secure land in Florida for a fraction of the valued price. Disneyland opened during the same year that Project Paperclip scientist Wernher von Braun worked as a technical director on Disney TV shows about space. Von Braun later became an expert on Walt Disney's Tomorrowland, an area of the park showcasing impressive futuristic structures. Located underneath the surface are tunnels or utility corridors, which can be accessed through certain unmarked doors located in various shops, restaurants, and attractions. It is in these utility corridors where child pornography, child trafficking, and mind control programming are allegedly taking place. Transcripts document the close relationship between Walt Disney and FBI Director Edgar Hoover as they correspond about how to bring the FBI's influence into children's TV shows such as the Mickey Mouse Club. These child stars, as well as the children viewing these programs, have been groomed and desensitized by sexual behavior. The correlation between Disney child stars and drug addiction, crime, mental breakdowns, and dissociative behavior are merely products of the victimization they endured while being subject to Hollywood's elite producers and handlers.
An extremely traumatizing MKUltra mind control experience that I've had was the most dangerous game of human hunting. No matter what the weather, I didn't have any clothes and was turned loose in the woods and then literally hunted by men with guns, and never knowing whether or not I would actually be shot. They used hunting dogs to track, which was really, really traumatic. And of course, it was kind of designed to where there's no place to run, no place to hide, because there was no way to get away from them. And it was at one of those human hunting places that I saw George Bush Jr. hunted just as I was. And his own father and Dick Cheney were a part of extreme trauma base for him because they were creating a Manchurian candidate who would become president.
Go on.
So the ghost stayed in the girl made him stop eating candy.
It was absolutely horrible that anybody was being hunted. And I've always had extreme compassion for George Bush Jr. It was an effort to be able to keep all the power in the Bush-Clinton dynasties.
People think, well, you run against each other, you're enemies. Political enemies. Well, we were friends before he beat me, before we ran against each other, and we've been friends afterward.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
My primary mind control programmer was Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino. He was the founder of the occult temple Aset that proliferated on our military bases and where occultism was used for mind control on and by our military.
The Army has known of my religion for the last 20 years. There has never been a problem with it.
I've been involved in intelligence and psychological operations for about 40 years in all levels of it and across the intelligence community.
He used the blood traumas and brutality, high voltage stun guns, and of course the neuro-linguistic programming, the language of the subconscious. I met with Aquino on various military and NASA installations.
Elmer, are you in there?
I was transferred over to my next handler, Alex Houston, a ventriloquist, stage hypnotist in the country music industry. And at that time, the country music industry was being completely taken over by the CIA for distribution of their cocaine throughout the United States. Under Alex Houston, I was taken to the Caribbean, specifically the U.S. Virgin Islands, the human trafficking operations that were set up there. Now we know that to have been involved with the Epstein Island and the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing. That's kind of what it evolved to next.
He's accused of recruiting a network of young girls he sexually abused at his mansions in Florida and New York.
Law enforcement officials tell NBC News he faces 2 counts of sex trafficking for alleged crimes.
Trafficking underage girls to the private island near St. Thomas.
Some even refer to it as Pedophile Island.
Authorities say he declared it his primary residence.
Sleazy Wall Street tycoon Jeffrey Epstein used the Lolita Express to ferry a bevy of beautiful young women. Among the passengers, former President Bill Clinton and Britain's Prince Andrew.
Newly obtained documents show Clinton actually took at least 26 flights on Epstein's private jet.
According to NBC News, Jeffrey Epstein has died by suicide in his jail cell.
was my experience that Bill Clinton is bisexual, leaning far more towards a homosexual end. All I've ever seen him involved in was the homosexual activity, with very limited experience with him myself. Whereas my experience was much more prevalent with Hillary Clinton, because Hillary is also bisexual, leaning more towards a homosexual end, and it was she who accessed my sex programming to fulfill her perversions.
Bill Clinton was being groomed to slip into the office of president because he would do and say what needed to be done. Therefore, it was decided in 1984 that I heard him and George Bush talking at Swiss Villa Amphitheater in Lampe, Missouri, that when people became disillusioned with Republicans leading them into the New World Order, then Bill Clinton as a Democrat would be put into place.
The Clintons have been involved in the most horrific criminal activity groundwork for the New World Order. And at that time, the first thing they were implementing was NAFTA. The human trafficking that was being done over the border, the drug trafficking being used over the border, it was all sanctioned. And when people like myself who were coming across with all these drugs and were being trafficked, they never could get any information from me because the information was compartmentalized and it was all covered under national security. I would also be introduced into what was the beginning or the foundation of adrenochrome. They would take the blood from tortured individuals and that's what they would drink and get kind of addicted to it or something. I don't know, I can't relate to the concept at all. It was so traumatic for me. But for them, it's something that they literally feed off. Not only do they feed off fear and negativity and trauma, but they also feed off the adrenaline of those who are tortured and ultimately murdered. That was the very groundwork on the adrenochrome, but it was actually a structured system already because it was spanning several states. On those adrenochrome operations, another aspect of it that they used was aborted babies. So I was ritually impregnated and aborted numerous times. Some babies I would carry longer, and it was just extremely horrific knowing how aborted babies are used in that horrific manner from my own experience. I finally was able to give birth to my daughter, Kelly. And I couldn't protect her from the abuse that she endured any more than I could protect myself. I didn't even have an ability to have a survival instinct anymore. I had been so horrifically traumatized for so long. Of all the things that I ever endured, there's never been anything more traumatic to me than knowing that my own child was abused. I would love to have been able to protect her and stop the cycle of abuse, but I couldn't. And because I couldn't, that became probably the biggest means of control over me that there could possibly be. And that same control mechanism I found out in later years through Kelly, she always thought that she was protecting me by taking the abuse, and I always thought I was protecting her. When we realized that with each other, it was just such an overwhelmingly profoundly beautiful moment between us, just to know that the magnitude of the love that we had was always there. The maternal instincts were still in place, even through all the horror and the trauma and everything else. Kelly was born into a higher level of MK Ultra than I was. Hers wasn't just all trauma. They also used harmonics on her literally from birth. The harmonics, they vibrate the neuron pathways of the brain. So rather than having the brain automatically compartmentalize a trauma and shut down those neuron pathways, they would just use harmonics to vibrate those compartmentalizations into place, and they could use that same harmonic to open it for carrying out different operations. Even at 2 years old, she was in the White House just standing like a little robot. She was sent over to Bush while I was with Reagan, and that was just the way things were routinely done. George Bush was one of the biggest promoters of pedophilia that ever was. He put so many of our judges in positions where they had to comply with turning abused children back to the abusers, and also for beginning to have foster care systems and our mental health systems and everything else infiltrated with perpetuating MK Ultra mind control. I thought the whole world was saturated with this kind of criminal activity. Everything around me was involved in it. The handlers and the owners of the mind control slaves, there were so many of them that they actually had a charm school that trained the girls or guys for various sexual perversions and fulfilling them on high levels of government. We were also used for blackmailing purposes with these kind of extreme perversions. They were like strategically hidden cameras in the ceilings and in the walls that would film the perverse acts, and then the politicians or whomever, the various world leaders, were then blackmailed into compliance with the New World Order through all these videotapes. One place where they had a lot of cameras and perversions set up just specifically for this was Bohemian Grove. At Bohemian Grove, the politicians would sit around and talk about the different ways that they were going to be implementing the New World Order, different traumas that were going to be unleashed on society. One discussion that was just really horrific was using AIDS as a means of population control and introducing that in. I heard discussions like at Bohemian Grove where they were talking about aliens and stuff, and even though my experience with George Bush was him doing a holographic image of turning into a lizard because it's an innate fear of reptiles that's been conditioned from so many generations within us, that it's an MK Ultra mind control theme to say that it's reptilian in that regard. But it doesn't preclude the fact on where is the alien influence, and is there alien influence, and what does it all really mean? At Bohemian Grove, when they discussed it, they said that aliens are us in the future, and that it's just a matter of time travel and a manipulation of time. They also talked in terms of aliens being dimensional and multidimensional. Even though my memory was compartmentalized, when trauma occurs, the brain also photographically records events surrounding trauma.
When John F. Kennedy was assassinated, most people know exactly where they were and what they were doing, because this was an event that traumatized the nation. And this exemplifies how the mind photographically records events surrounding trauma.
And my brain was photographically recording these discussions that were going on. One of the most interesting was between George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton. George Bush was talking about how he believed in pedophilia so strong, especially incest, and sexually abusing a child to heighten their suggestibility.
Down here is a button Now, does anybody in this room know how to twerk?
Drag Queen Storytime's been happening all across the nation.
Well, let's turn around and shake your butt. Shake them, shake them, shake them, shake them, shake them.
It's meant to inspire diversity and inclusion.
Strawberry Corn Cakes right here says that it's all about promoting creativity.
What has this world come to? It's come to a world where drag kids actually exist.
And people do ketamine on a couch.
I'm gonna find out who's lactating today.
He was very much for that aspect of things, whereas Bill Clinton was discussing how he believed in the genetic cloning aspect of things and genetic manipulation, how important it was for us to be able to catch up with artificial intelligence by stopping human procreation and creating a generation of genderless children.
Come to think of it, well, is Alex a boy or a girl?
Actually, Alex doesn't define themselves as boy or girl.
What else is there?
Back in your day, most people understood the world in terms of just boys and girls. But now, we know gender is more complex than that.
If you feel you want more time to explore how you feel about your gender before your body starts to change, it's important to talk with a parent, counselor, therapist, or doctor about the feelings you have regarding your gender. After some discussion and counseling, you may be referred to an endocrinologist. Endocrinologists specialize in hormones, and they are the most likely to prescribe puberty blockers for someone who wants them. Puberty blockers are medications that will stop your body from changing. They are usually given as an injection or an implant.
We've gotten to a point where our children are being taught in school that they're neither male nor female, regardless of their physical apparatus. We had male-female issues at one point that now have so many other divisive aspects added into it. It's just dividing people more and more and more. At the Grove, when girls reached age 30, they were murdered or they were sacrificed, because at age 30, there's electrochemical changes that happen in the brain where people sometimes those neuron pathways start changing a little bit and memory starts leaking out. We'll see where people who have been programmed specifically that are high profile, like maybe in the entertainment industries, they will start breaking up around age 30. We'll see things like what about Britney Spears shaving their head. It's just part of what happens around that age.
Blonde wig, her hair super short in the mugshot.
So many government secrets and personal reputations were staked on the belief that I could never think to bring to mind, to tell their secrets, that I would never be deprogrammed to remember the things I've been programmed to forget. It was horrific knowing that so many lives were lost, so many girls when they reached age 30. And of course, so often for the perversion purposes, they were saying that the girls were too old to be used anymore for perversion anyway. So, you know, they were useless, just get rid of them. And I was definitely going to be killed there as well. I was to go out in a blaze of glory and be burned alive. And I know that was the plan because it was told to President de la Madrid of Mexico, who was so much a part of the foundation of NAFTA. He was being reassured and told that I would be killed and that the secrets would go with me. I'm so fortunate that an intelligence insider who saw the kind of corruption that was going on in the highest levels of government saved my life so that we could begin to expose what was being done. Mark Phillips was so outraged by what he saw, he decided to take action. When he rescued me out of that situation, I had no memory whatsoever. I had no conscious thought of my own. I only knew to do exactly what I'd been programmed to do. To be able to think on my own was like my brain would go into this black hole, and I'd be pushing it, trying to make a decision even on maybe what to have for dinner. You know, just to even think that thought was an exercise in itself. Because of what he knew in mind sciences, what he knew about when spies were tortured and traumatized, how they could come back from that, and how they could heal. He knew all the methods that the government had for helping them, and took that information and just handed me the keys to my own mind. The first thing he did was strap a watch on my arm, because a concept of time equates to a concept of awareness. And I had no conscious awareness at that when he rescued me. And I had so much compartmentalization that the whole conscious mind was just not active in any way. So the watch was a tool to help start bridging that. He also taught me that as my brain felt safe and began flashing memory, that I should make notes of whatever that flash was. As fast as it happened, just still make a little note. Because moving a pen requires a logic part of the brain, and it takes that and just puts it over into logic where it can be consciously dealt with. Seeing it on paper and having it physically moved in my brain was just the start of a healing process. As I was writing out more and more memory and bridging those neuron pathways and opening those up, I gained continuity of thought. I gained continuity of time. I started having a concept of time and conscious awareness. I distinctly remember the moment that something had happened within my brain and the way that it fired, and to where all of a sudden, boom, you know, it felt like I was present, like I was in the real world. I could feel again. Mark was in intelligence and wore many hats. He was considered a spook, you know, more than just any particular agent. He worked for all different agencies in whatever capacity was needed, which included Secret Service and being in the White House. He was interested in how to help the mind and how to heal the brain. So he got into mind sciences on significant levels and was studying mind sciences at the War College and Psychological Warfare Division when he came across Michael Aquino, and was absolutely disgusted that something like occult trauma was being used to manipulate minds of the masses and of individuals.
I was sworn to secrecy on the things that I witnessed, on the equipment that was developed, and I can assure you that in 1967, all the way up through 1973, when I was involved in this research as a Defense Department subcontractor, the equipment that I saw then was 25 to 30 years ahead of anything known on this planet in the private sector.
Mind control is not new in this country or any other country. It's been around for thousands of years. But the sophistication of it to this point has now reached such a proportion that people are seeing the results everywhere, but they don't see is the sophistication of the mind control itself. They don't recognize the symptoms that are being created in these people until it's too late.
He was already becoming disgusted with what he was seeing going on by the time he realized that Kelly and I were under mind control.
While we were in Alaska and Kelly was safe, she started beginning to have memory flashes, and she went into respiratory failure. So we took her to Humana Hospital, and the diagnosis there, they could not find any biological reason for her respiratory failure. So they brought in a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist was state appointed. The psychiatrist had seen many mind control cases because of the Air Force Base up there and because of, espionage being launched out of Anchorage in that area for years.
Information on mind control had been suppressed for so long. Mental health had no clue what it entailed.
Mind control has advanced to the point where they know the ins and outs of the brain and the mind so well that they know how to program not only the subconscious, but to go into the primitive mind, the very area of our mind where blinking, breathing, and circulatory, heartbeat, all that is regulated. And they could go in there and put death programs in place. In my daughter's case, it was respiratory failure, so that in the event that she ever had cause to remember, which they never expected could happen, they would just simply go into respiratory failure, circulatory failure, and no information would be released at all. There was no chance of the information getting out that way. Since my daughter was being raised was genetically and mind control being brought up to be in espionage, she had that program in place and it went into effect.
And it put her in a hospital where she was held a political prisoner. When I was finally allowed visitation with her, I was not allowed to discuss anything with her that could be helpful to her. I wouldn't tell her what her past was because I already knew at that point that a person needs to heal from the inside out, not from outside input. There's no way I was going to ever do that in a way that would hinder her own healing process. I wanted to nurture it and help the therapist nurture it, but instead they just completely shut me out and told me I was crazy. And then turning to law enforcement, the FBI came in on my daughter's case and testified that there's no such thing as mind control.
The violations of laws and rights that proliferated in her so-called legal case were extensive. We had one clean district attorney that went in and told the judge that he was violating constitutional rights and human rights in my daughter's case.
He said, Your Honor, you're violating every law that I know of. And the judge said in open court, laws do not apply in this case for reasons of national security. That judge, in essence, saved our lives because he absolutely said publicly that the United States government was responsible for covering up this case.
As soon as he said it, the records were sealed, and the office of the district attorney where those records were burned. Because I was healing, because I had healed sufficiently, because I had free thought again, there was no way I was going to cave into following orders that wouldn't protect her any more than they ever had. Instead, I had love as my motivation to heal. That added to the safety in my brain, that added to the firing of the neuron pathways, it added to the memories starting to surface, and as quick as they were surfacing, I began writing them out.
I took those memories that she had recovered, and the details, the maps, everything that she handed me, and I turned it over to people that I knew within federal law enforcement, not FBI, federal law enforcement, and I'll tell you one of them was Customs, and they in turn provided me with enough substantiation and proofs that I could prosecute.
The U.S. Customs was absolutely amazing right from the start. They were right there to investigate what I had written out, what I was saying about the drug operations out of the Caribbean, what I was saying about the human trafficking. They had, at the head of the agency, William Von Raab.
It is Customs' job to stop illegal drugs at the U.S. border. Von Raab thinks the U.S. is losing the war against drugs because from where he sits, the government isn't fighting to win.
He was doing everything he could to get the whole mess exposed and taken down.
Von Raab accuses the State Department under the Reagan administration of virtually ignoring the international drug supply.
Every time Von Raab would turn in information, especially as pertained to me, national security went on it and it went nowhere. During those years, William Von Raab became so frustrated he just totally resigned.
I often felt that it was sort of the Mexican government and the U.S. government against me in the war on drugs.
In spite of his resignation, the agency itself remained clean and continued to investigate everything that I was remembering as fast as I was writing it out. By 1995, when Mark and I were ready with the testimony for U.S. Congressional Permanent Select Committees on Intelligence Oversight, we were censored for reasons of national security again. And Congress was censored under the National Security Act from hearing my testimony. And yet, it did allow for us to very carefully and very strategically proceed forward with releasing the information that had all been validated by U.S. Customs, Secret Service, concerned members of various law enforcement and intelligence agencies. We put it into book form in Transformation of America. We took those few copies that we could afford to have printed and had them distributed throughout Washington, D.C. It was a safety measure for us to get the information disseminated as fast as we could.
But our First Amendment rights, constitutional rights, guarantee us the right to publish it.
Because there was no money in the kind of whistleblowing that we were doing, we would have to decide, okay, are we going to buy, this for dinner, or are we going to buy stamps? And we would always go for stamps because stamps were more substantial for keeping us alive because we had to get the word out there.
The information that we released to every member in Congress at the same time.
Mark and I continued speaking out to anybody and everybody who would listen. We spoke out to various law enforcement groups, to border guards, U.S. Customs, even the police who were concerned about the human trafficking and drugs pouring across the border. Senator Byrd had an office in the FBI building, and he had it in there for the purposes of being able to manipulate the law to allow for the human trafficking, to allow for the drug operations to go unchecked. And the catch net for the human trafficking operations was the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that was through the FBI. There were so many people that were being affected, so many mothers who had lost their children to human trafficking operations and then have the courts system turn on them and return the children to the abusers. We spoke out to mental health groups that were really wanting some answers because they found that what they were doing to treat ritually abused children and children who had been mind controlled wasn't working. They needed more tools. So we were able to hand them those tools. And because I had healed to the extent that I had, the mental health community was very much interested in that.
What has happened to Cathy O'Brien is happening all around the world.
I was exploited unwittingly for nearly 3 decades of my life.
We were sold to the federal government by our father and his priesthood and military leaders.
I was being trained to be a sex slave for the elite.
My family were used as entertainers, child pilots in wars, medics, special messengers, high-priced call girls, presidential models, sports figures, and international spies.
There were countless other children in my same situation.
Most of the children there were babies and toddlers. I was strapped down in a sort of lab-like setting.
These experiments were performed on me in conjunction with mind control techniques and drugs.
The deliberate dissociating through trauma.
Dissociation also serves the purposes of the occult because the children have no day-to-day memories of the atrocities.
Although the process of recalling these atrocities is not an easy one, nor is it without some danger to myself and my family, I feel the risk is worth taking.
Since sharing it, I've lost a 20-year singing career, lots of money, my health, and my home.
All these atrocities did occur to me and to countless other children, and all under the guise of defending our country.
These psychopaths at the top believe they'll create a satanic order that will rule the world. At a high level of the U.S. government, there was support of this kind of thing with Operation Bluebird, Paperclip, Mockingbird, and of course, MK Ultra, still going on today.
This was the ITNJ on the inquiry into human trafficking and child sexual abuse, which was a global expose and pursuit of justice. And Mark is in the cover of it. It also gave voice to all those nations that were concerned with bringing a stop to this New World Order funding mechanism. The criminals that I was exposed to under MK Ultra are still the same handful of criminals in control today, or the effects of what they have put in place.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
The mind control information gathered in the programs has been used against the American people and the rest of the world with alarming saturation. Aspects of what has been learned due to the experiments can be seen in every corner of our society. The intentional traumatization has left a nation of bewildered followers or triggered those who have awakened to the truth of the obvious control. Once one breaks through the veil of understanding, the systematic traumatization of America reads like a manual from Mengele's original research. The formula of using trauma to control the victim is brought into a much larger scale, and we see where mind control takes over a collective nation, and therefore the world.
They want to suppress truth, they want to suppress information, they want to control the populations, and for what end purpose? I can't relate to. It's a dominating force that feeds and thrives off of negativity. It's like they feed off of fear to the point where they literally feed off of it through the adrenochrome. Since fear is the primary basis of mind control, they used events like the assassination of John F. Kennedy to traumatize the nation.
Just a moment, we have a bulletin coming in.
It's official now, the president is dead.
We had Waco, we had Ruby Ridge, and the Oklahoma City bombing.
It is apparently the single deadliest terror attack on U.S. soil ever.
There's other traumas that have occurred, like 911.
The mind control of the American people has seeped into the foundations of nearly every organized system. From the disintegration of the family unit, to genetically modified foods, fluoridated water, poisonous additives, heavy metal toxicity, vaccinations, weather manipulations, bioweapons, EMFs, pharmaceuticals. Our bodies and minds have been hacked.
Breaking news, there's been another deadly mass shooting in America.
When we see trauma being unleashed on society, whether it's something that's traumatizing the whole nation like 911 or something else like the school shootings or the mass shootings that go on, when we look at the shooter, is he really responsible or is somebody pulling strings?
The alleged shooter died by suicide at the scene.
Who's pulling those strings? Who's making these kids march to new world orders on our streets and burn down our cities? We need to start looking at the handlers and looking at who's really responsible for the actions. When we get to the source of the problem, to the ones who are in control, then we're going to be able to effectively stop it. And again, it's just a handful of criminals. The whole founding of this New World Order is based on drugs, human slavery, and human trafficking. During the Trump administration, it became more known on a national scale because he was constantly shining a spotlight on it.
Solving the human trafficking epidemic, which is what it is a priority for my administration.
Even conservative estimates conclude that some 20 million people around the world, including right here in the United States, are trapped in human trafficking situations.
I've signed 9 pieces of bipartisan legislation aimed specifically at combating human trafficking domestically and around the globe.
Uptick in human trafficking, prostitution, often forced, involving children.
It's not just child slavery or child sex abuse, it's also child torture. Because you have adrenalized blood. You have the whole blood drinking ceremony of the satanic world. It's also the use of children for harvesting body organs. And then you have ritual ceremonies and ritual murder, as well as incidental murder.
A SARS-like virus, which has infected hundreds in China, has now reached the United States.
The WHO chief has called COVID-19 public enemy number 1.
It's confirmed the coronavirus outbreak is now a pandemic.
A unique opportunity to reset our global agenda.
300 military personnel will be brought in to assist.
When I saw COVID hit, I saw that this was going to be used to usher in the New World Order. It was mass mind control of the whole globe.
Starting today, you're going to be seeing a bigger push to educate the public about COVID vaccines. That's because the Ad Council is launching an initiative. It's called It's Up to You.
This vaccine means hope. It will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They tap directly into people's fear of death.
We begin the hour with a horrifying statistic.
It's fear. Like, fear really drives numbers. Fear is the thing that keeps you tuned in.
If it bleeds, it leads. Yeah.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
I like that.
What more is there to wait for?
Don't wait. Vaccinate.
Over the weekend, Big Bird once again rolled up the feathers to get a COVID-19 vaccine.
What more do you need to see?
A new incentive to get kids vaccinated in New York. The city now offering kids 12 and up limited edition Avengers comic books if they get vaccinated.
We're working with major businesses like grocery stores to provide special deals.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Congratulations.
Bring them in to get vaccinated, but when they're in, they'll get discounts to purchase goods in that store.
The Winston-Salem-based chain will be giving away 2 donuts to each vaccinated customer tomorrow.
All right, I just got my vaccine, and I would recommend it to anyone and everyone.
This is not about freedom or personal choice.
No, screw your freedom.
For some people, having celebrities who are familiar faces speaking up and saying that they are taking the vaccine,
it didn't hurt,
will be convincing.
A strategy that is not without precedent. Newspapers around the country printed this photo of the king receiving the polio vaccine backstage at the Ed Sullivan Show in 1956.
The percentage of teenagers that actually got the polio vaccination after this promotion went from 0.6% to almost 80% in 6 months.
So please, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it now. Do it now.
The better we're going to be able to help stop the spread of COVID and keep everyone healthy.
So roll up your sleeve and do your part.
This is our shot.
Now it's up to you.
I hope people listen to all the experts and the Dr. Fauci's on, talking about the need to wear masks.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. Wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is.
Then you want it to fit better, is put a cloth mask over.
If in fact you are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, you are protected, and you do not need to wear a mask outdoors or indoors. Even if you are vaccinated,
You need to wear a mask in indoor public settings.
One component of MK Ultra Project Monarch mind control was wearing a mask. Kelly, when she was being trafficked, she wore a mask. It completely depersonalizes, it separates a person from others, because you cannot see the micro muscle movements, you can't see what the expression is on a face. So it alienates people from each other.
Ongoing study of child neurodevelopment finds that children born during this pandemic are now showing lower cognitive skill signs.
By putting that mask on, the brain is lacking oxygen and not being able to critically analyze and think as clear as it needs to realize and recognize the properties of mind control that are going on around them. Michael Jackson was in Project Monarch. He grew up in the same project I did, and he had to wear a mask. He wore a mask too, so that he would keep his voice silenced if he wasn't singing, so that he wouldn't be speaking out and revealing what abuses he had endured as a child, what abuses he was enduring in the music industry. We can still wake up from that, arm ourselves with truth, take off our masks and allow enough oxygen to our brains for critical thinking, and be able to use our voice again, speak out and make ourselves heard, take a stand against the injustices and the criminal activity that's proliferating, because the New World Order is rooted in the most horrible crimes against humanity. We have so much healing within ourselves. We have so much that we can control with our own immune systems, and also just knowing that we have the strength to stand up against a common virus is being hindered by this constant programming and imposition that we're being exposed to, which is nothing more than a form of mind control. How to avoid a virus from outside ourselves rather than from the magnitude of all that we have within. Mark taught me from the very beginning to voice no negatives without a solution. And that stopped me from just complaining about my past and what had happened, and forced me to be able to think forward. Mark's life was disrupted, and he passed away in 2017. It was extremely difficult. And I knew that if I'm still here, I'm here for a reason. And that I would continue our shared life's purpose. Before Mark passed away, he wanted to release the healing methods that he taught me. He hadn't been able to release them because he was bound by laws of sedition from doing that. So we released it in PTSD Time to Heal, because I'm not bound by any laws of sedition. And it was my experience to heal. For Mark, that was a very fulfilling thing to be able to accomplish. It's up to us, every single individual, to be able to realize their own truth, their own strength of spirit. Through PTSD Time to Heal, they'll also realize that the physical capabilities they have within themselves to actually heighten their own immune systems and have their own defense against any virus that we encounter. We have some amazing things to start discovering about our lives and our surroundings, and it's time that we move on with that exciting aspect of our lives. Mark and I were able to keep a clarity of thinking, like being above the storm, to where you have a clearer view to see that positive change was happening, that people were waking up, that they were starting to make a positive difference. People often ask me, well, why do you smile? How can you be positive after all you've been through? It's because I see where we're going. It's because I know that the reality of what I experienced and so many others have experienced on this planet is finally being brought to light. I've always perceived it as an hourglass. Everything has flipped now, and it's flipped to the good. That's why we're seeing the corruption that's been around forever. It's been hiding in the shadows, and we've just not known that it was going on. Now that we can see it, we need to start standing up and doing something about it. We need to take that personal responsibility. When I was healing from mind control, people would tell me, well, you have to love yourself. And I didn't know how I could love myself after what I had been involved in and used for. And yet, Mark told me that he helped me to understand that I was not responsible for the actions that others forced me to do and tortured me to do. That I was responsible for all of my actions going forward. So I was healing on levels that were both mental, psychiatric, psychological, the physical brain, and the whole spiritual, by realizing responsibility for my own life. I found it within myself on the base core energy of my being, and that energy is love. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. If people want to call it God or label it by any other name that resonates with them, it's irrelevant. And I think when we look within ourselves, we can start tracing that source. When I look at the duality of the world, I learned that light overcomes dark, but dark cannot overcome light. With that duality, there still is tipped just ever so slightly to the good. I chose to continue fulfilling our life's purpose of raising awareness on mind control and healing from it. The negative and the solution. And I spell solution with a S-O-U-L. And this is the ultimate solution. So I still choose to maintain a balance with all the keys that he gave me, and just honor the life that he lived, because he was a hero to us all. He's in every breeze and in every